Okay, welcome back to the fun times. So now we should actually have our app up and running, right? So if we check here, localhost 3001, we've got this cool app. This is a favicon, it's animated. How does this all happen? Remember, we downloaded all this boilerplate code. So it already happens magically because we downloaded it all and it's all up and running. This is what all these files are. And if we check here, we see a favicon icon. That's that icon that's spinning around. We have these logos, manifest JSON. And then I want to put your attention towards this app.js file. And we see this function and we see all this other stuff. Now, what I could do, just to show you, everything in this div statement, by the way, any questions you have, not just div, but any questions you have, you can ask ChatGPT. Like, what is div? What is this function? I can actually copy this whole function and I can go to ChatGPT, for example. I could say, what does the following function, let's make this big. What does the following function do in our app.js page in React? And then colon and paste in the function. Let's see what it says. The app function is a component. It returns a JSX element, right? See that JSX element is what the function is returning, right? So we get this logo, etc., which we see here. The component's written in JSX. JSX, as we discussed, is that code that combines HTML and JavaScript. The app function is being called in the root element of app. So it's really cool. And you could focus on very specific things. I could say, what is a div tag? What is div in this code? And then I can copy the code over and hit enter. Div is an HTML element that represents a generic container. It can be used to group other HTML elements, right? So, and then you can keep going, I mean, how far you want to go down the rabbit hole is up to you, right? But again, it's not going to tell you everything you want to know and then it's in your brain forever. This isn't the Matrix where you take a pill and then you know it forever, right? You still have to do your due diligence. You still have to go and Google things probably and double check with Stack Overflow, or just take your time if you're going to use just this and keep asking questions and then practice. But look, it's telling you, look, div is a tag for writing HTML. So you have a div container. Within the container, we see this h1 where we can write a big header. H1's the biggest header you can write. Welcome to my website. Have a little paragraph underneath. Very nice. Very, very nice. All right. So that's what that is. And that's how you can ask it questions. Now, that being said, I want to go back to our code. So I'm going to go back to Visual Studio Code. And everything under this div, I'm going to delete. Boom, it's gone. Now I'm going to add an h1 header, and I'm going to say, welcome to the game. And now I'm going to save that, and I'm going to go back to Chrome and take a look. Now we see welcome to the game in a header. And notice also that React automatically refreshes. We don't have to constantly reboot the server like we have to do with NodeMon, with Express. So that's just another great thing with having React. Okay, there's React. I'm going to switch this tab over here. Okay, beautiful. So we've got React compiled. Let's scroll back up from our questions back to the example it gave us right over here. So above this, it even says, listen, after you do these three things, which is what we did, we want to create a new directory called my app, which we did, right? That's what the third thing does. Now, in the React app, if we want to build, because remember what the important thing we asked it. The important thing we asked it wasn't just to give us boilerplate. It was to build the front end with React in order to add users and passwords to the database. So then it says, after you have the boilerplate, you can use this useState hook to manage form state and handle input changes. You can write a function to handle the form submission and send a request to your Express server. So we got this example over here. Now, if you didn't get a big example like this, then you can just copy the code. I could go through it and you can just type it out. Or you can ask ChatGPT, what is an example for the component for adding a new user or password of the code? You can just ask it and it should bring you this code or something close to this code. Now, in case the code's a little bit different, let's just code it along together, right? Because we're building this app together. And we can build this code together very similarly to how they have it set up and move forward from there. So we're going to build the code together, and then and then we'll stop along the way and ask ChatGPT questions for things that we don't understand, so you can continue to work on your skills of interacting with ChatGPT as you develop applications as a developer. Okay, I'll see you there to build out our app code in the next video. Bye-bye. All right, so let's go ahead and write out this functionality to add a form, because think about it. What do we really want? We want to have a form, remember? Remember in our early example, we want our app to have this form where you put in a username, input for a username, input for a password, you hit enter, and when you hit enter, that adds it to the database, and then we get to play the game, right? So that's the whole point. So that's what we want to build. Let's go into our studio code and start building it based off of what ChatGPT has told us to do. So as we mentioned, our function app is going to have this return statement, as functions often have. The return statement actually renders what we want, all right? But we also want to have hooks. Now, what are hooks in React? Well, let's ask ChatGPT. What are hooks in React? Let's see what it says. So in React, hooks are a new feature, new-ish, that allows us to use state and other React features and functional components. Prior to the introduction of hooks, we had the class-based components, okay, blah, blah, blah. They allow you to use state. Okay, great. It's a little bit vague. It's a little bit vague. Maybe I should have asked a more specific question. I could say, what is the use state hook? But I have to wait for it to finish because it kind of got stuck for a second. But you know what? In the meantime, I can tell you what the use state. So use state hook, this hook that we see up over here that we're going to use with our code, basically allows us to track state in a function component. As we talked about state previously, so go back if you're not sure. And if you really want practice, you can take my complete web development course where we really go into hooks pretty deeply. But the use state hook is essentially for storing variables, part of the application state, and it changes as the user interacts with the website, right? So we want to store username information, and then we want to set that information up, and we do that with use state. All right, that's how we do it with functional components and hooks. And sometimes, this hangs. So you just gotta let it hang. You'd have to probably refresh the page. But while that's doing that, let's actually go back and write some code out ourselves now that we have a better understanding what use state is. It's okay if you're new to React and you're very confused by it. Very normal. It makes sense if you do it a few times, but usually it doesn't make sense the first time, especially if you've never worked with libraries for JavaScript. All right, so we're going to create a variable. We have an array, and then we can actually set up where we want our state. So we want to have a username, and the convention is then to use the word set for the username. So we say username, set username, and then we bring in use state. And since we're bringing in use state, we actually need to bring it in from React. So we're going to want to actually import. We don't need this logo anymore, so I'll get rid of that. Let's make this a little bit better so you can see things better. So we want to import from React use state from React. A little bit redundant sounding, but that's what it is. It's actually import use state from React. That's how I should have said it. Okay. And now we can actually bring this in. We're not going to break the code. So we want a username. We want a password as well. So we do the same thing, right? If that's password, then what would be our second argument? So what would be the second element in the array? Well, then we want to have set password with the uppercase always on the second word. And use state. And I'm initializing, by the way, inside use state. You don't have to, but what I'm doing is I'm initializing username to an empty string. And I'm doing the same thing for the password. So when we initialize it, there's a username and password, but there's nothing yet. So we instantiate the data type to string, which is an easy way to do it, fast way to do it, and then it's set up for us. Anyway, we can save that. And let's see where our ChatGPT is. It looks like it's hanging, so I'm going to refresh. And actually, if we scroll back up, so we see here we have the username and password. The next thing it tells us or shows us as an example is handle submit and an event. Now, let's skip this for now. Let's focus on what's in the return statement. What's in the return statement here is a form. The form has this onSubmit button, has an onSubmit action, which is the handle submit. So when you hit enter and you put in the username and password, we use handle submit in order to send this post over to our API. That API is what? That's our database. It's actually showing us all this. And again, you can ask it individually each thing. That's the magic of GPT. But even more magical than that is taking a Udemy course with me, which really gets you exactly what you need to know efficiently, right? That's why you spend a little bit of money to learn with me and ChatGPT. Fetch is a method basically that sends out for a promise when we do async handling. And then you use a .then for the promises to get the results, and we set up this JSON, right? Because we want to get JSON information, because if you take a look in our data, this is an object of information which returns the content type as JSON. JSON's JavaScript object notation. This is the notation. Key pair values. Very easy to work with data when it's in this format compared to XML, for example. But we have a form. Right? We'll just focus on the form. The form has what? A label, then it has a username, input, label closes. In HTML, you open a tag, then you close a tab. We have another label. Input is where you type things in. The type is text, type is password. Let's actually write this out so it makes more sense together. So I'm going to go back into Visual Studio Code, and we have this div, our container, which is our app, and then we have this welcome to the game. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave that up there, and under our H1, we're going to build the form. So I'm going to have a form. It's going to be onSubmit. It's going to equal, actually, we're not going to do that yet. Let's just do form. It's going to have an action. Actually, let's not even do that. Let's just close our form. So we just have a form, very simple. Let's have a label. The label is going to have a username. Under the label, we're going to put our input. Now the input is a self-closing tag, because inside the input we can create values as an input. So we want what type of input? We want it to be a text box. What's the value? We're not going to have any values yet. We'll just say a text box, and we want to have a little break. So we're going to use the BR tag to create a little space, and then we're going to do the same thing. So I'm just going to copy all this label stuff from here to there, and then underneath all this we're going to have a button to submit the action. So we're going to have a button, and we can actually call this button submit, and we can have a type, which is a submit button. The type's important because then this button will then react to the form action of onSubmitting, right? The button's going to be a part of the form. So let's just save this for now, and let's go back to our Google Chrome and refresh and take a look at that. Now, in our React client side, we see username with an input field, another username with an input field, and a submit button. Now, this should be password. So let me go back to Visual Studio Code. Because I copy-pasted, I forgot to change it. Oops. I'll say password, save it, go back. Username, password, submit. Doesn't look very good. We can fix all that later. For now, we're focused on functionality, not looking all nice and pretty, right? We'll do that. We'll get all nice and pretty after. Very, very good. So this is how you write HTML. This is how you write HTML with JSX in React client side. You have a form. Now we can put in a user button. We have a username and password. Does this work? Well, if I put in a username and a password and I click submit, we're just going to get this question mark. Nothing happens because we did not build any code for the actions. All we did was, just so we're clear, is write a skeleton, like a schema of what our form is. But in the next lesson, what we're going to do is, using state that we've brought in, we're going to add functionality to this form so that when you do put a username and password, it's actually going to react to our server here and then send that information over into our server, so that our database is going to be updated with another username and password using a form instead of just hard coding logic. Because that's why we're here. It's to learn how to truly dynamically interact with a full stack application and build it out. All right, good stuff. We'll stop here. In the next video, let's take a look at that code. That code, by the way, is all here already. I'm just breaking it down for you. Okay, I'll see you there in the next video. Bye-bye. All right, so we should have our front end looking like this. We got the welcome to the game. we have a form that doesn't work. We have our back end up and running. We have our database up and running. We can verify that our front end is working on our terminal with one instance of our React client side. We have another instance of our MongoDB, new user, right? Okay, so we're connected. The server's listening on 3000. Very, very good. So we want to now actually get this form to work. We want to connect the username and password so that it actually does something. And we started to do it. We started to do it with state, right? We bring in this state. Oops, let's go to app.js, right? This is all in our app.js. We bring in our state, and we set up user state to initialize as empty strings. We don't actually do anything with it yet. So we have these inputs. Let's start with the inputs. When we type in the inputs, what we want to do is actually set up these inputs so that this input here is going to have a value of the username. And then when you type into it, when you change the value of what's going on, that gets updated. That gets updated with on-change event handlers. That's what we call them. So we're going to have two types of on-change event handlers. We're going to have a handle username change, and we're going to have a handle password change. One's going to be for the username, and one's going to be for the password. I hope that makes sense. Now, follow along. So we have a type here for the username. We're going to give it a value. This value is going to be username, right? Username is from where? That's our state. That's the value of our state. That's what we want to change. So when we change the value, we'll create this on-change handler. We use, by the way, the on-change and value and type, these are all attributes that come with input, which is why it's fantastic to work with React forms. So handle username change. This is a function that doesn't exist. We're going to build it, all right? Now, we're going to do the same thing for our password. So I'm going to change this to password. And now password should be highlighted as well. And this is going to be handle, hopefully you guessed it, password change. All right, so let's write these handlers. So handle username change is a function, and this is a function, and we need to actually create them. So we're going to create one for the username. So I'm going to say constant handle username change is a function. So this is how you write an ES6 function. Is an arrow function. Oops, it's going to take an event, right, as an argument. So this is just like writing a function like this, but we're writing in ES6 and we want a constant function so that it fires off this event, all right? Arrow functions, they don't redefine the value, all right, within their function body. And it makes it a lot easier to predict their behavior with callbacks. That's why this is why this syntax is important. It's not just to look fancy for no reason and confuse you. And again, take my web development course or just practice React or just Google more on React, learn on your own. I don't have to always constantly plug my courses, although I do appreciate it when you support them. Handle username change event, and we're going to say set username. So now we're actually going to use the state to change what the initialized state is. What do we want to change the state to from an empty string of what the username is? Well, what we want is the value of the input, right? Remember, what we want to have here is blah, blah, blah. Oh wait, no, it is, where is it? Oh, we're getting an error because we haven't defined these yet. But you see, you can kind of see username there. That input box, that's the value. Whatever we type in that is what we want. How do we get that value? Well, you see how we have the event? We want to listen to the event. And what we do, it's a very, very classic dot notation of event target value. So you do event. From event, we can grab a target. And from target, we want the value. We want the username value. All right? So we're going to save this. Now we're going to do the same thing for the password. I'm going to copy this. I'm going to paste it. And we're going to change it from username to password. And instead of setting the username, we want to set the password. And if I save this now and I go back to Chrome, we now see we have a username and a password. And if we were to open up our developer tools, so if you go to developer and you go to developer tools like this, we can actually see what's happening. If I were to go back to Visual Studio Code and I console.log username, and I save this, we go to Chrome and we refresh. If I start typing in username, look what happens in the console. If I say Tom, we get Tom. If I say ChatGPT is my friend, it's so cool, wow, it makes me feel good. Look what's going on, look what's going on. Why is it doing this? Because our event target, we're basically targeting the value, and then in real time we're logging what that is, and then we're seeing it in our log. All right, so just to show you that it's working, you can test it. All right, but we don't want this because it's kind of annoying, so I'm going to delete it now. But there you go. So now we have set up a handle user change and a handle password change. And if we were to go back to our example here, notice how in the example form they also have on-change events for set username, set password. The only difference is they actually write out the whole event targeting in the input itself. We did it separately. Now, if it's the only thing you're going to do is that, it makes sense. And then the only difference is you have to fire it. But I think it's a better practice to separate it, especially if you want to add more code to it after. But this works as well, right? There's many ways to skin a cat. And never skin a cat. That's very not nice. Okay, so let's stop here. And in the next lesson, let's actually, now that we have our state set up, let's write out this fetch request so that we can fire the form, and then when we fire the form out with the username and password, it's going to update our database. Very exciting. I hope you're as excited as I am. It's all very exciting. I'll see you in the next lesson whenever you're ready. Bye-bye.